Warning, contents in this story may be sensitive to some. Listening discretion is advised. This is the true story of Robert Andrew Berdella, the Kansas City Butcher, taken from the monstrous book of serial killers. On June 23, 1987, Kansas-based serial killer Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. dragged a sedated 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson into his basement. He would then violently torture Pearson for the next 6 weeks before beheading and dissecting his remains in August of 1987. Pearson was one of the 6 victims to fall foul to one of the evilest killers in the modern era. Berdella was the eldest son of a deeply religious family. His father was of Italian descent. Raised in Ohio, he was sent on religious education courses and attended the local church for Mass. During his childhood, he was afflicted with various impediments that saw him bullied in school and beaten by his father. When he was young, his father rarely allowed him to socialize outside of religious sermons and family chores. As such, Berdella became a loner and was known to have been socially awkward. When he was 5 years old, he was diagnosed with nearsightedness and had to wear thick-rimmed glasses. Combined with a speech impediment, he withdrew from society at an early age. In doing so, Berdella didn't follow in his younger brother's footsteps and take up sport, instead becoming lethargic and gaining weight. Because of the lethargy, his father would often compare him to his younger brother, belittling him for not being like his other son. Although Berdella's father abused his children, he would pay particular attention to his eldest son. He emotionally and physically abused them, sometimes beating them with a leather belt. As he reached his teenage years, Berdella became confused about his sexuality, which he kept to himself. He finally came out as gay in his late teens. On Christmas Day, 1965, when Berdella was 16 years old, his 39-year-old father died of a heart attack while at home. Berdella turned to religion in the hope that faith would somehow see him through what he described as a difficult time, regardless of his father's abuse toward him. When he didn't find what he needed, he began reading up on other religions and soon started to lose faith in what he had been taught as a youngster. At around the same time, he had turned his withdrawal into a mask of exaggerated confidence. He became difficult to be around due to his new rudeness and attitude toward others. In the case of Berdella, it was one of the first known instances of a movie directly impacting the thought processes of someone who had the potential to kill and go on to kill. The plot of The Collector is about a man who abducts women and holds them captive in his basement. It is a direct correlation to the exact process used by Berdella in his future murders, except that he chose men instead of women. 2 years later, in 1967, Berdella moved to Kansas and went to the Kansas City Art Institute, where he was known to have become a promising student. But things quickly took a turn for the worst. After falling into the drug crowd, he started to abuse drugs and alcohol and even began dealing to other students. Some serial killers torture small animals in their childhood years due to being able to overpower small animals when they can't overpower human abusers or carers. Berdella started late and used art as an excuse for torturing animals. As part of his art, he used sedatives on a dog to see the effects, then tortured and cooked a duck in front of other students for art. After that, he left the institute after widespread condemnation. He was arrested a few months later in possession of marijuana and LSD. It is unclear whether the LSD was a type known as orange sunshine acid, which is the type that Charles Manson and other known criminals went on to use. He stayed in Kansas and moved to the now infamous 4315 Charlotte Street in the Hyde Park area of Kansas City. He enjoyed using male prostitutes and spent a lot of time in gay bars in the city, openly taking part in casual sexual encounters with other men. He would spend time with drug addicts and homeless people and gain their trust by plying them with drugs. Ever since his teens, he took pleasure in and saw the benefits of becoming pen pals with people. He then wrote letters to people all over the world, including to Vietnam and Burma, 2 countries that were very much off limits to the Western world at the time. In return, he would receive photos of ancient sites and small items from those countries, and so his collection began to grow. In disregarding mainstream religion, he had developed a belief and understanding in alternative religions and occult magic. This would lead him to open a rather unique shop in 1982. Bob's Bizarre was an antique and curiosity shop. It sold things like primitive art, Asian artifacts and jewelry. He subsidized his earnings by stealing items for his booth and then started taking lodgers at his home. He became friends with the son of one of his fellow booth operators, Jerry Howell. When Jerry was 19 years old, on July 5, 1984, he became Berdella's first victim. Berdella promised to give him a lift to a dance contest, but instead drugged him with heavy sedatives, took him home, and tied him to his bed. Over the next 24 hours, Berdella raped, tortured, and beat Jerry. He died after the drug stopped his heart and he gagged on his own vomit. Berdella then dragged the body to the basement to try and resuscitate him, but instead he suspended the body from the feet. As Jerry's body was hanging upside down, Berdella cut his throat and other arterial veins in order to drain the blood from the corpse. A day later, he returned to his basement and used a chainsaw and knives to dismember the body. He wrapped them in newspapers and put them in several trash bags, which were collected shortly after and taken to the landfill. We know all this in such great detail because Berdella had been keeping extremely elaborate notes and photographs of his victims and other assaults. His notes detailed such individual acts of torture and abuse and outlined the intense physical and mental satisfaction that he took from carrying out the murders in such a way. He killed another 4 young men after Howell, and his final victim was on June 23, 1987. Larry Wayne Pearson was initially one of Berdella's lodgers, and Berdella hadn't planned on killing him. After he bailed Pearson out of jail, he made a crude remark about gay men, and Berdella saw red. Berdella drugged him and dragged him to the basement, where the horror began. For the following 6 weeks until August 5th, when he finally killed him, Pearson was tortured and abused in the most horrific of fashions. He would be injected with drain cleaner and had piano wire tightened around his wrist to cause nerve damage. Berdella broke one of Pearson's hands with an iron bar and electrocuted him with an electric transformer. He kept Pearson in various states of sedation and moved him around the house, including the second bedroom where he would rape and abuse him further. Toward the end, Pearson summoned the energy to bite Berdella's penis during a session of forced fellatio. Berdella then beat him to death and later dismembered him in the basement. He stored Pearson's head in the freezer before burying it in the backyard. Although Pearson was his last murder, another victim escaped his clutches in 1988. 22-year-old Christopher Bryson managed to escape from the house. He jumped from a second-floor window and was wearing nothing except a dog collar around his neck. He broke his foot when he jumped but managed to call out for help. Someone heard him and called the police, and Berdella was subsequently arrested. 334 Polaroid images and 34 snapshot prints were found in the apartment when it was searched. There was a possible link with a total of 20 murders, but only 6 could be verified using his notes and confession. Berdella was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He died of heart failure on October 8, 1992, while incarcerated at Missouri State Penitentiary.